Welcome to another episode of My Two Cent. My name is Paul Emerson, and I'll be giving you my 2 cents. Today's topic is, unfortunately, as difficult as to say, Donald Trump is right. So I'm gonna just open with that. I'm gonna respond to the video to the Oval Office meeting with Trump, but I want to play the video in full in this video so that when I explain my position or expand on the subject itself, it will come from this video, because social media has a way of telling you what you want to hear, or catering to your base, or saying things that sound good but doesn't even really have any merit or any position at all to even begin with. And the thing that is easy to forget about this whole conflict between Ukraine and Russia and NATO and the rest of the world, and how it affects the globalization of reality, and this need to pretend like somebody is right and somebody is wrong, and two wrongs make a right, and like the lack of just the understanding of humanity. I'm gonna say this point, and then I'm gonna play the video, and then I'm gonna further explain. The war in Ukraine has been lost. The Ukrainians lost the war. They were not able to stop Russia from advancing into their sovereign nation, and they were not able to force the Russian people and the Russian government to cease and desist. And that is a political war that Zelenskyy, as the president, lost. So I'm going to say all of that before I explain why Donald Trump is right, because the context of the actual video I'm responding to is going to be more important than me just ranting for the next 45 minutes. And then you don't have any centralized understanding of what I'm conveying. You can find this video with better quality on the internet. This is just for the sake of my inability to record high quality video because I'm homeless living in my car right now.
He's got tremendous hatred, and I understand that, but the United States of America, and for the good of the world, I'm aligned with the world, and I want to get this thing over with. You see the hatred he's got for Putin. It's very tough for me to make a deal with that kind of hate. He's got tremendous hatred, and I understand that, but I can tell you the other side isn't exactly in love with, him either. So it's not a question of alignment. I'm aligned with the world. I want to get the thing set. I'm aligned with Europe. I want to see if we can get this thing done. You want me to be tough? I can be tougher than any human being you've ever seen. I'd be so tough. But you're never going to get a deal that way, so that's the way it goes. All right, one more question.
I will respond to this. So look, for 4 years in the United States of America, we had a president who stood up at press conferences and talked tough about Vladimir Putin, and then Putin invaded Ukraine and destroyed a significant chunk of the country. The path to peace and the path to prosperity is maybe engaging in diplomacy. We tried the pathway of Joe Biden of thumping our chest and pretending that the president of the United States' words mattered more than the president of the United States' actions. What makes America a good country is America engaging in diplomacy. That's what President Trump is doing.
Can I ask you?
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So he occupied our parts, big parts of Ukraine, parts of East and Crimea. So he occupied it on 2014. So during a lot of years, so I'm not speaking about just Biden, but those time was Obama, then President Obama, then President Trump, then President Biden, now President Trump, and God bless, now President Trump will stop him. But during 2014, nobody stopped him. He just occupied and took. He killed people. You know what the contact
2015.
2014.
2014 and 2015.
2014?
Yeah. So
I was,
he
I
killed.
was not here.
Yeah, but
That's exactly
but-
right.
Yes, but during 2014 till 2022, yeah, the situation the same. The people been dying on the contact line. Nobody stopped him. You know that we had conversations with him, a lot of conversation, my bilateral conversation, and we signed with him, me, like a new president. In 2019, I signed with him the deal. I signed with him, Macron and Merkel, we signed ceasefire. Ceasefire, all of them told me that he will never go. We signed with him with gas contract. Yes, but after that, he broken this ceasefire. He killed our people and he didn't exchange prisoners. We signed the exchange of prisoners, but he didn't do it. What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr.
are not
President,
strong-
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the President for trying to bring an end to this
Have you
conflict.
ever been to Ukraine that you see what problems we have?
I have been to.
Come once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems with bringing people into your military?
We have problems.
And do you think that it's
I will
respectful
answer.
to come to the Oval Office
I
of
will
the United
answer.
States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems. Even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless.
You don't
God
know.
bless. You
Don't-
will not
you
have
gotta-
a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because
I'm
you're in
answering
no
on
position
this
to
question.
dictate that.
That's exactly
Remember
what
this.
you're doing.
I'm not
You're in
dictating.
no position to dictate what we're going to feel.
You
We're
will-
going to feel very
you will
good.
feel influence.
We're going to feel
I'm-
very
I'm
good and
telling
very
you,
strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed
From the
yourself
very-
to be in a
from
very
the very
bad position,
beginning
and he
of the
happens
war.
to be right about
From the
it.
very beginning of the war.
You're not
Mr.
in a good
Brown,
position.
I was
You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having
not playing cards.
Right now, you don't.
I'm very
You're playing
serious,
cards.
Mr. President.
You're
I'm
playing
very
cards.
serious.
You're gambling
I'm the
with the
president
lives
of
of
the war.
millions of people.
You think-
You're gambling with World War III.
What do you think
You're
about-
gambling with
what do you
World
think
War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. That's
with
back
all
to you.
respect to your
Far
country.
more than a lot of people said
very
they
respect.
should have.
Have you said thank you once? This
A lot
entire
of
meeting?
times.
No, in this
Even
entire meeting,
today.
that you said thank you.
Even today.
You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the
What-
United
what
States
you're
of
speaking
America
about.
and the president who's trying to save your country.
Please, you think that if you will speak very loudly about the war, you
He's
can...
not speaking loudly. He's not speaking loudly. Your country's
Can I-
in big
can-
trouble.
can I
Wait a minute.
answer?
No,
Can
you've
I
done a lot
answer?
of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not
I
winning.
know.
You're not winning this. You have a damn
We-
good chance of
we are
coming out
staying,
okay because of
Mr.
us.
President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
You haven't
in
been
this
alone.
cabinet,
You
and
haven't
not
been
only
alone.
in this
We
cabinet.
gave you, through
I
this
said
stupid
thank you.
president, $350 billion.
You voted
We gave
for
you
your
military equipment,
You
and your
voted
men
for
are
your
brave, but they had to use our military.
What about
If you didn't have
You
our
invited
military
me-
equipment,
you invited
if
me
you
to
didn't
speak.
have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3
okay?
days, I heard it from Putin. In 3 days. This is something
Maybe
new.
less.
In 2 weeks. Of course, yes.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this. I
Again,
tell you.
just say thank you.
I said a lot of times, thank you to American people.
Accept that there are disagreements, and let's go litigate those disagreements rather than trying to fight it out of the American media when you're wrong. We know that you're wrong.
But you see, I think it's good for the American people to see what's going on.
I understand, sir.
I think it's
I
very
understand.
important. That's why I kept this going so long. You have to be thankful. You don't have the
I'm
cards.
thankful.
You're buried there. Your people are dying.
tell you
You're
again,
running
I
low on
know.
soldiers. Listen,
Don't please
you're running
be
low on
surprised.
soldiers. It would be a damn good thing.
Mr.
And
President.
then you tell us, I don't want a ceasefire. I don't want a ceasefire. I want to go and I wanted this. Look, If you could get a ceasefire right now, I tell you, you'd take it so the bullets stop flying and your men stop getting killed.
Of course, we want to stop the war.
But you're saying you don't want a ceasefire.
But I said to you,
I want a ceasefire.
with guarantees.
Because you'll get a ceasefire faster than an agreement.
Ask our people about ceasefire, what they think.
That wasn't
doesn't
with
matter
me.
for you what-
That wasn't with me. That was with a guy named Biden, who was not a smart person.
But
That was with Obama.
president. It was your president.
Excuse me. That was with Obama, who gave you sheets, and I gave you javelins.
Yes.
I gave you the javelins to take out all those tanks. Obama gave you sheets. In fact, the statement is Obama gave sheets and Trump gave javelins. You got to be more thankful, because let me tell you, you don't have the cards. With us, you have the cards. But without us, you don't have any cards.
One more question to Mr. Vice President. I'm sorry.
It's going to be a tough deal to make,
Um,
because the attitudes have to change.
what if Russia breaks ceasefire? What if Russia breaks peace talks? What do we do then? I understand that it's a heated conversation right now.
What are you saying?
What
She's
if
asking,
Russia
what if Russia breaks the ceasefire?
What if anything? What if a bomb drops on your head right now? Okay? What if they broke it? I don't know. They broke it with Biden because Biden, they didn't respect him. They didn't respect Obama. They respect me. Let me tell you, Putin went through a hell of a lot with me. He went through a phony witch hunt where they used him and Russia. Russia. You ever hear of that deal? That was a phony Hunter Biden, Joe Biden scam. Hillary Clinton, Shifty Adam Schiff. It was a Democrat scam. And he had to go through that. And he did go through it. We didn't end up in a war. And he went through it. He was accused of all that stuff. He had nothing to do with it. It came out of Hunter Biden's bathroom. It came out of Hunter Biden's bedroom. It was disgusting. And then they said, the laptop from hell was made by Russia. The 51 agents. The whole thing was a scam. And he had to put up with that. He was being accused of all that stuff. All I can say is this. He might have broken deals with Obama and Bush, and he might have broken them with Biden. He did, maybe. Maybe he didn't. I don't know what happened. But he didn't break them with me. He wants to make a deal. I don't know if he can make a deal. The problem is, I've empowered you to be a tough guy. And I don't think you'd be a tough guy without the United States. And your people are very brave. But you're either going to make a deal or we're out. And if we're out, you'll fight it out. I don't think it's going to be pretty, but you'll fight it out. But you don't have the cards. But once we sign that deal, you're in a much better position. But you're not acting at all thankful. And that's not a nice thing. I'll be honest, that's not a nice thing. All right, I think we've seen enough. What do you think?
What's
huh?
this negotiation?
This is going to be great television, I will say that. All right. We'll see what we can do about putting it together. Thanks.
Okay. So on this channel, we deal with science, empirical data, and unfortunately, we don't say things that sound good or make us feel good because the reality of the world is what it is. And unfortunately, if you really pay close attention to the conversation that was being had by the Ukrainian president and Donald Trump, the United States president, they have already lost the war. Like, there is no war being fought. Russia is trying to occupy Ukraine, and Zelenskyy is using external resources from other countries to defend the sovereignty of Ukraine against Russia. Now, here's the conflict, right? Here's the real global conflict that everybody wants to pretend like doesn't exist. Russia has nuclear weapons, and the retaliation of Russia if Russia dropped a nuclear weapon on Ukraine, every last citizen in the world would be in uproar, even Russian people, right? Even the Russian citizens would be like, that was the line. You went too far. That's not okay. And Putin would be out overnight, right? Like, the Russian people would literally storm the Capitol and be like, that was the line. The problem that only Donald Trump seems to understand is the NATO alliance wants to invade Russia. The NATO alliance is trying to use Russia to fight a proxy war against, is trying to use Ukraine to fight a proxy war through Ukraine into Russia to conquer Russia. Putin, right? The Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian president, I respect his position, but he's upset and offended that Russia came into his nation and is invading, right? Russia doesn't want NATO to come into their country and invade. Russia has been chilling. I'm sure Russia has been doing things that they shouldn't do like every other country on this planet, but Russia has been chilling. Russia has been doing what Russia needs to do for itself and its people, and has been doing its best on a global political level to be in a position of mutual respect with the rest of the world. The International Space Station is in space because of the cooperation between America and Russia. So it's not like Russia has been running around on the planet for the last 40 or 50 years being a dictator, right? Russia told NATO specifically, if you sign treaties with Ukraine, that will be an act of aggression and we will go to war. And what did NATO do? NATO doubled down. NATO doubled down. There are enough nations on this planet that could have helped the Ukrainians in their transition into democracy, that they didn't have to alliance themselves with the NATO alliance. The NATO alliance, if you do your research, was designed specifically to counteract the threat of the USSR, which ultimately became Russia. So when the NATO alliance went into Ukraine, it was an act of aggression toward Russia. And I hate to have to say that, but that's just the truth of the situation, right? You don't allow your neighbors to come on your porch and pretend like, you don't allow your enemies to come to your neighbor's house and set up camp on their porch and pretend like it's not an act of aggression against you, right? So Zelenskyy as a president had to make a decision. He had to make a decision. Do I listen to the threats of Putin and don't sign a treaty with the NATO alliance so that I can engage in negotiations with Putin while maintaining my sovereignty as a nation? Or do I alliance myself with the NATO alliance and hope that they will protect me from Russia? And that's what he did. Zelenskyy was like, let's alliance ourselves with the NATO alliance so that we don't have to keep being under threat of Russia. But what has been lost in all of the noise over the years is that Russia was helping the Ukrainians with their terrorist insurgents. There were European terrorist insurgents running around in Europe before COVID. And Russia was helping deal with that. And the Ukrainian government didn't want Russia infiltrating and invading and doing espionage behind the scenes in their country. But that's just the reality of what really was taking place. Before COVID, before the world got shut down, Europe had a lot of white, European, Caucasian terrorist organizations moving around in their nations, blowing shit up. We just forgot. There were bombs going off in France. There was bombs going off in Germany before they shut the whole world down with COVID, right? So there's always a bigger picture to understand about what's going on politically in this world. NATO is fighting a proxy war through Ukraine with Russia. The Russian president, whether you like him or not, has the same rights to govern as every other nation on this planet. And as long as he's fighting a war with Ukrainians, he will stay within the guidelines of the rules of engagement, right? Donald Trump is saying very specifically, if we enter NATO alliance to come into Ukraine to help you push Russia back off of your soil, that is not the Ukrainian government fighting Russia. That is the United States Army invading Russia through Ukraine. We can't do that without risking a nuclear war. So we're not going to do that. So all of the documents that you see that Donald Trump needs him to sign will prevent Putin from dropping and launching nuclear arsenals. That's what's the stakes. We're sitting around here on our phones, looking at the internet, trying to be all emotional about it. Those are the stakes. Russia is a nuclear they have nuclear armament. Ukraine doesn't have nuclear armament because Ukraine allianced itself with the NATO alliance, and the NATO alliance said, dismantle all your nukes and depend on us to protect you. That's the same thing NATO said to Russia. Dismantle all your weapons and depend on us to protect you. You see where it got Ukraine. That's the reason why Russia doesn't want to play ball. The NATO alliance was designed specifically to destroy Russia. Do a Wikipedia search. Do a Google search. Go get a book and look at the history. Russia used to be called the USSR. The USSR was it was just like the United States of America. It was the European Asian region of the world. And it was the largest alliance of governments under communism that basically reigned across that whole region of the world. And it was such a threat that the other European unions created NATO, specifically to counteract the USSR. And they used proxy war. From my understanding, they used proxy war with Afghanistan when Russia was trying to invade Afghanistan to get access to more oil. They used proxy war to bankrupt Russia through indirectly supporting Afghanistan to fight the Russian army. And it pretty much just bankrupted the Russian army to where the USSR fell and Afghanistan never fell. And then we have the situation we have right now. But guess what happened because of that? Every fucking thing that we saw after 9/11 all started because NATO used Afghanistan to fight a proxy war against Russia, which was known as the USSR, to destabilize and break them. Caucasians like to throw stones and hide their hands. Right? Hi, Russia. Caucasians like to throw stones and hide their hands. NATO is invading Russia. Let's just call it what it is. NATO is invading Russia right now. Russia has the right to defend themselves, just like the Ukrainian government has the right to defend itself. When they went to Zelenskyy and said, hey, we want to invade Russia and we need to use Ukraine as the platform to do that. Is that okay with you as a president? Are you willing to sacrifice the Ukrainians so that we can beat Russia once and for all? Zelenskyy said yes. He said yes. Did they say it like that? No, that's not how humans talk. But that's what was understood. That's what was exchanged. That's the reason why Putin waited, dragged his feet when they wasn't trying to sign that NATO alliance, right? When the NATO alliance was being put together, Putin was like, I don't know, this is not okay. But guess what they did? They kept dragging their feet. They kept dragging their feet. 2 more weeks, 2 more months, 2 more days. So he attacked. 2 weeks in, he attacked just to see. NATO never came. NATO never came. So it's like, okay, this is exactly what I thought it was. So he went full, it's time for me to protect the Russian people. He went full in. They sanctioned him. They destabilized the economy. They did everything to try to cripple and bankrupt Russia. And it's like, it's never okay for a nation to go to war, but every nation has the right to defend itself, right? So if you can see your enemy is advancing on a territory that's going to make it easier for your enemy to defeat you, and you've already used diplomacy to say, please don't do that because I will see it as an act of aggression. And the other nations are like, oh, he's bluffing. What do you think is going to happen? Like, what do you think is going to happen? What do you think would happen if Russia took their largest and most powerful naval vessel and said, this is not an act of aggression, but we're going to take our ship to the Gulf of Mexico or the Gulf of America, whichever one you want to use, and we're just going to park it there. This isn't an act of aggression. We're just going to park it there. We're going to just leave it there, for however long we decide to leave it there, and we're not going to do anything aggressive or hostile. What do you think the United States' response is going to be? The United States response is going to say, if you pull up in that ship in the Gulf of Mexico, we will treat it as a sign of aggression and we will destroy it. And what do you think? Well, what do you think happens if Russia calls the bluff? That's what happens. That's the way human interactions and human exchanges occur. The Ukrainian government is trying to protect his people, and I respect that. But he fully understood exactly what NATO was trying to do, because the Ukrainians and the Russians are close enough to each other that they know how all this stuff works, and how all this goes. When the Ukrainian president was trying to alliance itself with NATO, it was never about the sovereignty of Ukraine, because there was no acts of aggression. If I'm wrong, correct me in the comments, but there was no acts of aggression from Russia with Ukraine before they brought the NATO alliance in. And there are thousands of governments all over this planet that could have helped Ukraine in any format for anything that the Ukrainians needed, for it not to have to be NATO. Each country individually could have helped and contributed to Ukrainians' development without it having to be the NATO alliance treaty. The NATO alliance treaty was designed specifically as a counteractive, aggressive force toward Russia. That's why it was formed. NATO sits around and pretends like they're just some alliance of government. Wikipedia will tell you the NATO alliance was designed specifically to counteract the threat of Russia. And if Russia is not being a threat, why are you forming an alliance on my closest neighbor's country? Putin politely said, no, I would respect the fact that if you guys would not sign a treaty with the NATO alliance, if the Ukrainian people could just not do that, and I would feel more comfortable with my history with NATO. They didn't want to listen. And like, how is that asking for too much for the Russian president? I'm just being like, as a human being, how is that asking for too much? How is that asking for too much? Hey, I understand that you guys are growing. I understand you guys are developing. I understand that you want to do more and be a part of a bigger global community. But if you could just not join NATO, President Zelenskyy, that would be great. Like, do whatever you want. Just don't join NATO, because I know that NATO is trying to come over here and attack. What did Zelenskyy say repeatedly? Putin won't maintain a ceasefire. Putin won't follow this. Putin won't follow that. He won't this. He won't. Because Putin knows that NATO is trying to fight a proxy war through Ukraine to destroy Russia, the same way they fought a proxy war through Afghanistan to bankrupt the USSR. And what President Trump understands is that, and he's probably the only person who understands this, is that Russia knows that it has the military force and the military arsenal and the military might to defeat the Ukrainian government and to seize power over Ukraine and bring a territory that it once used to have back under its control. We're not even trying to conquer something new. Ukraine used to be a part of Russia like 20 something years ago. Like, they used to be a part of Russia. Most of the Ukrainians consider themselves Russians. That's how close the relationship is. So Putin is looking at a territory that needs help, that is a close ally and has always been a close ally. And as a president that has to serve people, he has extended his reach beyond the scope of what it should be for the betterment of his people and people that he sees as his people, whether you agree or not. And he already understands the European nation just wants to come in and conquer Russia for what? For what? Like, why are you trying to expand your territories? And it's like in 2020, why are we expanding territories? Why? Why is Donald Trump changing the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America? Why? There's no need for any of that, right? But he still has the right to defend himself. So that's basically the bottom line. And if Russia depletes all of their resources to a certain level, to where they know that they have become compromised enough that if the European nations actually tried to invade Russia, he would lose the war. Donald Trump understands that Russia will drop bombs on NATO alliance countries because Putin has a personal vendetta against the NATO alliance. And that's the reason why Donald Trump is not committing the United States of America to the alliance of NATO. Because one of the things that we forget is that the United States military is designed to be the most powerful military on the planet. That means that we can hold our own against almost anything that is thrown at us for an extended period of time, so that the enemy forces will deplete to a point where we can maintain superior fire. But we can't fight indefinitely. And if we use military assets to go into Ukraine to fight a war to a stalemate, because they're not trying to conquer Russia, they're just trying to break Russia to the point where they can invade Russia and conquer Russia. They just want to use Ukraine as a battlefield to fight an extended war so that they can destroy Russian assets and do a wellness check on the strength and the weaknesses of the health of the Russian military and determine if they can actually invade or not. But Putin already knows this, and Trump already understands this. Russia has assets that we don't know about. Russia has resources that we don't know about, because Putin has already done this. And the most dangerous thing that you can do is fight somebody the same way twice. NATO has already used this strategy. This has always been their strategy, and they will continue to use this strategy because we as average individual people can't see the reality. We can't see the reality of what's really happening. Everybody wants to just say, Trump is disrespectful. The president, Zelenskyy, came to the White House to ask for help, and he's disrespectful. You have to define help. What does help mean? What does it mean? What is Zelenskyy asking for? Zelenskyy is asking the United States to conquer Russia. That's what he's asking us for. That's what he's asking. He wants us to give them enough arsenal, give them enough weapons so that we can conquer Russia. And guess what? So the President Putin respects the Ukrainians. He doesn't want to have to go to war with them, but he respects them. If you put the United States citizens on the line, he's not going to care about the United States citizens. He doesn't respect them. Why did you come all the way from your country over here to interfere with something that's happening between brothers? Like, what are you doing? Why are you here? Nobody wants to think about it on that level, because we have been polarized into believing that there's a good side and there's a bad side. Russia is wrong. Zelensky's right. Zelenskyy lost the war. If it wasn't for Allied help, there would have been no war. And if NATO wouldn't have dragged their feet, it would have never escalated to a war. If NATO would have actually been engaged in proper negotiations and diplomacy, there would have never been any war. If NATO would have just respected Vladimir Putin's position, there would have never been a war. There never would have been a war. They literally could have just said, okay, we're going to sign this treaty with Ukraine, but we'll make sure that in the clause, we can't stage any NATO assets. Putin would be like, that's fine. That works with me. If you want to give them aid, if you want to give them food, if you want to give them water, if you want to provide education, if you want to provide healthcare, that's fine. If you are willing to acknowledge that I don't want you to have NATO alliance assets staged in Ukraine doing military movements and military operations, then I will be okay with that type of an alliance. But the NATO alliance isn't about providing resources. The NATO alliance is about war. It's about building up arsenals and building up assets. If you came home one day and you saw your neighbor stockpiling weapons, how would you feel about that? Might you just come home from work and you're going to your house and you just see your neighbor, truck pull up and it's like all these guns are just getting unloaded into his house. How would you feel about that? Hey neighbor, what's going on? Like, are you good? Yeah, I'm good. But you'd be like, but why all the weapons? What are weapons for? What are weapons for? That's what it feels like for a president to see another country stockpiling arsenals, right? So NATO signs this treaty with Ukraine, and the Ukrainian government gets all of these weapons. They get all these trucks and tanks and armored fighting vehicles and javelins and, RPGs and increased military personnel that are over there doing training and working together on learning movements and Like, you see all this escalation of armament in your neighbor for an enemy that you know is your enemy. And you're like, why? What is the goal? What is the function? What is the purpose? So that's why Russia was like, no, we're not going to do this. We're going to just level, like, we're not even going to play games with them. The NATO alliance is not going to do this. They're going to, if they want to fight a proxy war with me on my own soil, in my own backyard, I'm okay with that. And that was Putin's position. The war has been lost. Zelenskyy has no position. I don't understand what sovereign means. I don't, if you think about the idea of, if you think about the idea that the Ukrainian people want to be a free governing nation that doesn't have any oversight or overhead from another nation, and weigh that against nuclear war, what does sovereign mean? What does sovereign mean? Because at the end of the day, we want to be sovereign. Okay, you want to gamble your freedom in a global capitalistic economy where no one is free over nuclear war. Because everybody is upset that Russia has invaded Ukraine. But nobody is taking a second to realize that for every second that NATO continues to fight Russia to protect Ukraine, they move us one step closer toward nuclear war. And nuclear war affects the entire planet. It's not something that happens across the street and you just sit there and watch. It affects the entire planet. And I can almost promise you, this channel is not about belief systems, but I can almost guarantee that if Vladimir Putin uses nuclear deterrence, he's going to level Europe. He's going to fucking level Europe. And we're not talking about one. He understands that if I fire a nuke, they're going to retaliate. So he's firing all of them. All of them. The whole arsenal. It's all coming for European countries. It's all coming for Europe, France, Germany, Italy. You know where Africans are? Those are the places that are not going to see the sun fall out of the sky, right? For the sovereignty of the Ukrainian people. This is what we're gambling. For the sovereignty of the Ukrainian people. And you can sit here and say, but it's not fair and it's not right that Russia is going to do that. It won't change the fact that there's going to be a 4-mile fireball in your backyard if you keep fucking with Russia. And it's really sad that the only person that seems to understand that is President Donald Trump. It's really unfortunate that the most cognitive person with the most perspective of actual reality right now is Donald Trump. Because everybody wants to have this pride and this ego like, oh, Zelenskyy, is not fair that Russia did this, and it's not fair that Putin is doing that. No. Russia said repeatedly during negotiations and peace talks with Ukraine that if you alliance yourself with the NATO alliance, I will take that as an act of aggression and I will conquer your country. He said it point blank and plain, repeatedly. As the time frames kept moving up for NATO to sign a treaty with Ukraine, Russia kept saying, if you do this, I will invade. I will conquer the country. I will take legion. I will not. He doesn't have a problem with Ukraine. Putin has a problem with NATO. Putin's problem is with NATO, not with Ukraine. And it's legitimate. If you actually take half a second to do some research, you will see that his problem with Ukraine is legitimate. If Zelenskyy actually cared about the Ukrainian people, he would stop his alliance with NATO. He would drop the alliance with NATO and he would enter negotiations with Russia. And the only thing Russia's gonna do is tell him you can't be in alliance with NATO. What do you think is gonna happen? You think that Russia's coming with like concentration camps? You think Russia's coming with mass murder and genocide? No, they're gonna be like, you're not allowed to alliance with Russia. That's what they're gonna say. That's it. Yeah, Putin's an asshole and he's a piece of shit man. He's a human being. He'll do more now because you stretched the war out for 3 fucking years. But at the end of the day, the only thing Russia doesn't want is for NATO to win and think that they're going to be able to invade Russia. And that isn't really what's going on. That isn't really that big of a deal. That isn't really unrealistic for a government. Like it's normal. That's normal everyday level politics, right? But the stakes is World War III. The stakes are nuclear armament. Every last American in this country needs to recognize that Donald Trump is correct, and we need to sit this one out. What we tell women all the time, go somewhere, sit down, and shut the fuck up. That is exactly what Americans need to do with this situation, because we don't need it. We don't need the smoke. We don't fucking need the smoke. Like, this is Russia, this is Ukraine. They like this, and we over here with a whole damn ocean between us. And not only is there an ocean in between us, there's 2 fucking continents. 2 different land masses separate us from the Ukrainian conflict. We don't need any of that. We don't. I'm living in my fucking car as a veteran. We don't need to be over in Russia helping Zelenskyy fight a fucking war when 10% of the United States citizens are homeless and can't. You know how great it would be if they could just use that war money to just like lower housing prices? That would be amazing. The billions of dollars that they're giving to the Ukrainians so they can fight a war, they could just give that to us so that we can like have better housing. Like, give us better housing. Give us $50 extra for food stamps, because it's all economical. Like, it all will be beneficial on a level that's better than just let's help NATO invade Russia indirectly. Like, you can't even be honest about what you're trying to do. You can't even just be honest and upfront about the fact that the NATO alliance wants to destroy Russia just for the sake of destroying Russia. What Putin is doing to Ukraine is the same thing that NATO is trying to do to Putin. The only difference is that Putin made it perfectly clear he wasn't okay with Ukraine signing a treaty with NATO. And there's enough, and like I've said 1,000 times, and you have to think critically sometimes, there are enough nations on this planet that could have helped Ukraine that they didn't need NATO. They didn't need NATO. Zelenskyy wanted to alliance himself with NATO because he understood what NATO was trying to do: invade Russia. And he sacrificed Ukrainian people on that cause. And the Ukrainian people, half of them was down for it because half of the people in the country don't like Russia. But the other half of those same exact people see Russia as brothers and family and friends and people of the planet that are neighbors. So when you got a 50-50 split, you got a problem. You have an issue. And that's the reason why the war is dragging out, because they don't really want to fight each other. So only thing that has to happen is Zelenskyy needs to just end his alliance with the Ukrainian government. I'm sorry, he needs to end his alliance with NATO and hope that Putin doesn't murder him. That's just how this has to play out. That's the only end game in sight. If he's not, as an individual, standing between present day normal everyday America, everyday humanity, and the other side of nuclear war, if he's not willing to sacrifice that, he is not as great of a man as you think that he is. Because he's gambling the idea that Putin will not use nuclear weapons or cannot use nuclear weapons in 2025. He's gambling that, and Trump called him out for it. And if Trump is the only person smart enough to understand what's really at stake, I should have started my 2 cents a long time ago. because it's really, 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 really bad if Trump is the only rational person in the White House on this subject matter. War in 2025 is bad. It's always going to end with nuclear fire. It will always end with nuclear fire. There is no country right now that will fall to conventional warfare. None of them. None of them. Because even like, if you took every last military asset the United States had out of the country, all the military assets, all of them, the active, the reserves, and the active, the state, the active, the reserves, and the National Guard, and the Coast Guard, you got rid of all of them, just for the United States. There's enough weapons in just the citizen population to fight back any invading countries, right? Yeah, whatever. There's enough weapons in the United States to, just at the civilian level, to fight off any invading country, right? So that means that even if an invading nation, like, yeah, they will have military grade defenses, like armored fighting vehicles, things like that. But those shotguns, the rifles, the pistols that the average American citizen have would still be enough of a deterrent and a threat to make it impossible for most countries to invade the US, right? So if you really, 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 really wanted to actually like cripple a nation to the brink of surrender, because you can't, Zelenskyy can't tell the Ukrainian people that he's going to surrender Ukraine to Russia, because it'll create unrest in the Russian people. I mean, it'll create unrest in the Ukrainian people, and the Ukrainian military are so invested that they will continue to fight. It will be extremely difficult for him to just stop the war, because humans are stupid. But the flip side of that same coin is that same energy of the president himself can't send out a ceasefire and then people will just stop. There's a slow de-escalation of conflict. The only way you can stop that is with a nuclear weapon. That's the only thing that, like, if Ukrainians, I would hate for that to happen. But if the Ukrainians just woke up and saw a fucking fireball, nuclear fireball in the sky, that would be done. They'll be done. They'd be like, there's no more war. We're done. We're not trying to do this anymore. We're just not, because it's something awe-inspiring about that. I was in the military, even though I never went downrange, so I got to train around a lot of the equipment and a lot of weapons, and the sound of weapon fire and gunfire and the flashes of the lights and the reverberations that go through the ground, and just hearing jets and rockets, and that energy is just so overwhelming that I can imagine seeing a fucking fireball in the goddamn horizon and just be thinking like, everything I've experienced is tiny compared to that. You would just be done. That would just cripple you. That would cripple your ability to move forward as a soldier. You would do it if you had to, but you'd be done. You'd be like, okay, we're done now. This is over. This was the end game. We called his bluff. We wanted to make sure that he would never. We assumed that he would never take it this far. But he has. And the thing about us being human, and the thing about humanity having a brain, and I'm gonna say this, and I'm gonna end this video. We have the ability to not have to see it happen to prevent it from happening, right? We don't need Russia to actually drop a bomb to understand how devastating it is. We understand what that is, and it doesn't have to manifest objectively as a truth, right? We don't need the history books to record that Russia dropped a bomb on Ukraine, because we know that Russia can drop a bomb on Ukraine. So when the president of Ukraine is actually engaged in negotiations, it should be at that level of understanding that the highest stake of all of this is nuclear global war. Not just Ukraine, but nuclear global war. Because as soon as Russia drops a bomb, you know what? Let's put this in real, true perspective. As soon as a woman is raped, understanding of the possibility of it becomes 100%, right? So as soon as Russia drops a nuclear weapon on any country, every other country feels like they're next. All of them feel like they're next. So there's no like one. It's not like Japan. The only reason why Hiroshima was the only first nuclear attack was because America was the only one with a nuclear weapon. If Japan would have had a nuclear bomb, and if Japan would have had the resources to retaliate, they would have. That's what's different now. In the past, it was just one person had one weapon of mass destruction and was able to use it retaliation free. They didn't have to worry about is Japan going to retaliate if we do this. They didn't have to. That's why they did it twice. They did it the first time to say we can do it. They did it the second time to say we did it on purpose. Took ownership over it. So yeah, so you see this man on the internet pleading for his people, like every other man that has been on the internet pleading for his people all over this planet, because humans lack the sympathy and the empathy and the compassion to have forethought to make good decisions about future events that will be beneficial to each other. He understood what Putin said. He heard what Putin said. If you sign a NATO alliance, that will be an act of aggression and it will be war. He knew he wasn't strong enough to defeat Russia. They were gambling on the idea that if Russia invades Ukraine, the United States will form an active. Basically, the NATO alliance, in a nutshell, hoped that we go in Ukraine, we get them to sign a deal, Putin takes the bait, attacks Ukraine, there's war. The war allows people to have a war mentality because citizens have to be okay with going to war because there's always propaganda. And then once the unrest is high enough, the United States can join the NATO alliance and invade Russia. And looking back in hindsight, it's very possible that the Biden administration had an invasion of Ukraine on its books. And it's very possible that the reason why Elon Musk shifts parties, even though I really don't want to even have to be dealing with that, it's very possible that the reason why Elon Musk shift parties is because he knew war was coming. He knew war was coming. And Trump knew war was coming. And that's why they shift parties. Because it's very, very, very possible that the NATO alliance had already had negotiations and works and things put in place to make sure that during this administration, the United States would have fought a 4-year proxy war through Ukraine into Russia. So I could continue, but I'm not going to. I think that everything Donald Trump said was right. I think that all of the things that have taken place over the last 3 years and with everything that has been, we have seen and we have heard, and with the track record of the world being what it is, the position for the United States to stay out of a war that would escalate. If the United States, right now they're fighting a conventional war in Ukraine. If the United States enters into that war with the NATO alliance, it will no longer be a conventional war. It will be a nuclear war. And Donald Trump is correct when he says that we're not going to do that. We need to end the war by simply agreeing with the terms and conditions. And the terms and conditions for Russia has changed, but at the core of the terms and conditions for Russia is you can't be a member of the NATO alliance. And Zelenskyy said that they want to be sovereign. So if you want to be sovereign, why did you alliance yourself with NATO? And as always, my name is Paul Emerson, and I have given you my 2 cents.